Welcome to Re-Review, where we watch movies from our past with a perspective from today. Your hosts are Matt, Bobby, and Austin, and we love the films from our youth, so we're taking a look back to see if they still hold up. In this episode, we are discussing Jerry Maguire. It was released in 1996, directed by Cameron Crowe, stars Tom Cruise, Cuba Gooding Jr., and Renee Zellweger. This movie gives us some insight into the life of a shark sports agent. Now, this is a fair warning. We're spoiling a 26-year-old movie, so if you haven't seen it, we will be revealing key plot points. Kind of want us to do a little time travel trip here. It was 96, so maybe you're watching Sliders on TV. You're probably dancing to the Macarena all over the place. And you saw Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible earlier in the year. Bobby, were you prepared for Tom Cruise to be in a romantic film in 96?
I don't think I was prepared for this movie. This movie took me off guard, and it hit the world by storm in 1996. It was a big deal back then, I remember. I'm pretty sure
unbelievably big deal, right?
I'm pretty sure I watched it in the theaters in 1996, pretty close to John Wayne Airport, which was a major location in this movie.
It was all over the entire film as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, I don't remember if it was around the time of this movie or afterwards, but I kind of had this fascination with sports agents, and I even read this book about a NFL sports agent, which had some similarities to the movie in some respects.
Released after the movie or before?
I'm pretty sure it was released after the movie.
But this probably started everyone really wanting to understand how these people do their jobs and what they get into.
Yeah, I think so.
So you saw it in theaters, and you know, looking back on it now, since it's been so long, anything changed for you? Were you a big fan of it when you saw it originally?
I mean, I definitely thought that it was a good movie, and I thought that it was engaging, and I think that it has a pretty touching love story. But I do think that so long after it originally came out, because all the stuff that comes after it kind of influences before, like parodies and various other movies that came out and copied it or took from it and all that kind of stuff. And so now, like, they're like, help me help you and show me the money and all that kind of stuff. It's just kind of a joke. And, you know, it's interesting how watching it that much after can affect the viewing experience.
So I definitely have to admit, this is my first watch of said film, and I had all these moments where I went, this is from that movie. Specifically as we got closer to the end with the You Had Me at Hello, which we'll talk about. And I was very surprised because you're absolutely right. It's referenced in pop culture throughout everything with these quotable items that come from this film. You know, notwithstanding the quotes, Matt, as we looked at how this film started and we're getting into the character of Jerry Maguire and really the introduction of him being this really awesome sports agent who then gets let go from his company just because he wanted to have a heart. I'm going to tell you, I was having a hard time even feeling empathy for him at that moment. How were you feeling?
There was a couple of moments in this movie, probably more than a couple, where I felt that it was just this weird sensation where it felt out of place. And I think what you're talking about is like within the first 10 minutes of the movie. So we're introduced to the world of being a sports agent and the place that Jerry Maguire has. And he very much is a shark in that world. And then because of one incident, he just has this, I don't know, existential crisis that occurs. And it felt strange because we still really didn't know his character or why he would do that shift all of a sudden.
Actually, you just nailed it for me. You're 100% correct. And I think that's what gets me. And this is sort of the perspective from today part coming in, where that shift makes sense to me, thinking of all the things that we've learned over the last 20 plus years about what happens to athletes while they play sports. So looking at that, I was just like, oh, that makes sense. But you're absolutely right. Why would his character have done that?
I think the best analogy that I can think of or comparison is if within the first 10 minutes we're introduced to Ebenezer Scrooge, and he's already did the switch and, you know, going to buy, you know, the turkey or the chicken or whatever for Tiny Tim and family. Like, it is such a weird shift that happened. Like, at least my impression was not necessarily he's supposed to be a bad guy, but he very much was a shark. You know, it's just like, you know, how we associate sharks outside of the sports agent world, you know, CEOs and politicians and anyone who's, you know, supposed to almost be like cold hearted. And like, I get there's the moment. I understand the setup that they tried to do, but I didn't know enough about his character yet or enough time spent with him for it to make a lot of sense to me that it just turned on a dime like that. And it was it wasn't like a minor switch or whatever. Like, he's like, they cut to him like bawling his eyes out and going through this moment where he just,
existential crisis.
Yeah, it was just this, it was like his entire world was shattered, but I didn't know what his world was, to be honest. Like, I know he explained it, but.
Well, is it just me, or did he feel like he was doing all this work and working hard and getting up at dawn and doing all this stuff, and for these athletes who basically like really didn't care about him, like the guy who got the hockey guy in the beginning who got a concussion really couldn't remember his name. And then in the press scrums, like no one ever mentioned him until at the very end when Rod Tidwell, Cuba Gooding Jr. mentioned him and is like, okay, I'm seen now with this relationship that I have, instead of just like being the like guy. And it seemed like he didn't have a relationship with any of his clients. He just kind of like spoke to them and said like, you know, all the catchphrases that you think an agent would say, like, you know, we're going to take you to the top and you're going to do great and we're going to do great things, and kind of like just greasing them up and then leaving off again. I think people could see through that kind of thing.
Well, and that's really, they were, I guess, trying to juxtapose Jerry Maguire's growth against the Bob Sugar character, Jay Moore, where Jay maintained that same shark attitude entirely while Jerry's was potentially breaking down. But I think sort of the disconnected, or let's say all the relationships in general in the film, kind of sit around the fact that Jerry doesn't have good relationships with anybody.
Except for the kid.
Did he, though?
I do agree, like, he did have a relationship with the kid, but it felt strange. He felt strangely attached to him for some reason, and I didn't entirely know why. Like, I don't know if it was probably like, again, it's one of those things that I felt maybe it was in the movie and it got cut for time or pacing or something. It just felt like there wasn't, I don't know. I feel like this is the problem with a lot of this movie was it's almost like they had these moments written down, like that someone made a bullet point of moments and didn't necessarily know how to connect them. And so they just kind of happen. And so you see like relationships happen. They introduced, what was her name? Avery, his fiance. Or pretty much, yeah, they didn't actually get married. So fiance. And I didn't really know anything about her. There she was. It wasn't until they introduced her again later on that I even knew what her job really was.
Wait, hold on. Remember her first introduction?
Yeah.
We were just like a regular movie, and the next thing you know, sex scene all up in your face.
Yeah, I think it was like cut. They literally showed like the kid, and then it cut to that. That was the most awkward cut I've ever seen in my life.
A lot of side boob, though.
There is a lot of nudity in this movie. It got that rated R rating for sure.
But yeah, I mean, you look at that setup, and I think about the idea that it was his fiance. They cut to him being at a bachelor party surprise, and then it's like they want to establish that I guess he wasn't a great guy with his previous relationship, so someone put a supercut of a video together to show him all the women that hated him over the years. I mean, what kind of cruel, sick joke is that?
I think it was more about like just the culture of possessions, you know, being like, okay, like we can get a whole bunch of people to say something about him, you know, and just kind of like the surface level stuff that they all lived in. I think they didn't have the deeper relationship that he developed with Renee Zellweger.
In theory, he developed.
In theory.
Yeah.
I still like, I mean, what's really interesting about that is that I think that I saw that he was kind of struggling with the relationship, and I know he had like a lot going on with his life, but I mean, his turning point wasn't overly convincing to me.
Okay, we're definitely on the same page there. One of my notes I actually wrote down is, I don't believe he loves her at all. We are skipping to him and the Dorothy character, Jerry and Dorothy. And then my second note was, actually, they ended up validating that he doesn't love her at all, and I was actually very happy about that because it was not convincing.
Wait, how did you see that he didn't love her actually?
Because they led to the point of them having a breakup, and I'm putting breakup in quotes. I was like, oh, this is good. They're actually going to divorce because this thing should have never happened in the first place because he did a last minute proposal, which is super gross to even do. And we can get to that part. I think the beats you mentioned, Matt, is what really gets me because we get introduced to the Avery character, and then as things start to turn south, because we never got to spend any time with them, the next thing you know, they're having a conversation about the struggles of how to be a good salesperson. And then it just flips into, we should break up. And it definitely had that feel for me of, where did this come from? I was a bit surprised there. And I think I kept feeling that surprise as we move through the entire film.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like that was kind of the theme of a lot of this. I feel like the only real relationships that I felt were established was the relationship between Roy and Marcy.
Mm-hmm. That was good. I like that one.
I feel like that one worked really well. I feel like even though they probably got equal screen time as Renee and Tom did, like I felt like it worked much more naturally. It felt more organic, whereas this one, it felt, they were just jumping from thing to thing to thing. It almost felt like how somebody who doesn't know how to be in a relationship would write about being in a relationship, you know? There's like the breakup with Avery felt very unnatural. It just felt like, okay, well, like literally like the day before the wedding or whatever. Yeah, let's just not do this. And then I think that just kind of continued with like a lot of the story where you're kind of dropped into a moment and kind of expected to know what led up to it. And I think there's a couple instances where they reference things and I think we were all confused. We were like, when did that happen? I don't know when that happened. And I think that happened a few times for me, at least, where I was just like, I don't know anything about the relationship with Avery. You had this relationship with, I can't remember his name, Jerry O'Connell's character.
Frank Cushman.
Cushman, the Cush. That one kind of was there and it was really weird. And then like it was just gone. And like it never really had a circle around towards the end, really. Like, especially because, there was this whole backstabbing thing that happened and nothing ever really kind of came of it from what I saw. Where like, I don't know, Cushman got betrayed by Sugar or something like that. And, something where like, okay, well, there's, a rhyme or reason to some of this stuff. And again, I feel like maybe it was just bullet points that they just was speeding through and we were just supposed to kind of get it, I guess.
I guess we could talk about the core relationship because this does fall under being a romantic film. I think this is what made it so successful, that people love the story that was put together for the characters that are Jerry Maguire and Dorothy. Bobby, if you're Dorothy, are you quitting your job for this man?
Maybe.
Wow.
I mean, so the reason she quit was because she said that she saw the passion and she saw that. What was the word she said? She said she saw some.
She's inspired.
Yeah,
right?
She was inspired. There you go. She was inspired by him, and she saw something worth moving along, and that's what she wanted. She wanted to be inspired. But there was a whole scene before that where she was watching him in the plane. So was that like romantic interest at that point? Like, was she like, okay, like this is gonna turn into something more than just I'm inspired by a sports agent and his business?
I do feel like she was giving those I already like this dude type of looks, which kudos to Renee. I mean, I felt like they were leading that very early on.
I mean, it's almost like what she said, right? She said that she was more interested in him than he was of her. And yeah, like he hardly, I mean, obviously he noticed her. He said where she was sitting and like, hey, like you're this person and you sit in this particular cubicle. Like, yes, I know that you exist, but she was watching him in the plane and then again in his office when he was screaming, plus when he was just talking on the phone after he got fired.
Which that's a whole other thing for me. I don't understand how you can get fired and go back to your job and then do more work and try to poach people. That's a different thing entirely. So, back to the Renee relationship with Dorothy. There's the element where as they start this business and they're trying to get this going, Jerry shows up drunk at her place and essentially assaults her. Not even essentially. I don't know.
He's her boss too, by the way.
Yeah. And it's just this thing that happens in the film and they kind of both move on from it. And this is one of those where I'm going, man, my perspective from today compared to, I guess, the way everyone approached this back then, really fucking creepy.
I mean, the way they showed it off in the movie is basically like, it was inappropriate, but it was okay because she was kind of like, oh, like she was interested in him, so it was okay.
Yeah, they definitely sold it that way.
Yeah, that's a really weird and awkward first date. And then, I mean, even the next date was pretty awkward too, I guess.
And I think that's what got me, because you go through that experience. They eventually have whatever office they have together, and he's apologizing about it. And she's walking out like, I need to give you your space. And he goes, oh, why don't we get dinner tonight? And she says, yes, we should get dinner tonight. And this is where she dresses up and gets fancy and invites him in. And it's like, this is a very interesting message to kind of send out there.
I feel like they tried to write it off within the story itself when she was talking to her friend or sister or whatever. I can't remember who it was, but the woman she was always talking with, basically trying to write it off as, you know, the way I interpreted it was, you know, I'm at that age, I'm starting to run out of options.
Oh yeah, you're right.
And so like, I felt like that was kind of the justification of why, and like, this is before the man, I wish I could remember, was it the sister or a friend?
Sister.
You're talking about Bonnie Hunt?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sister. Yeah.
She, you know, she was kind of being judgmental about it, and rightfully so. And then even she kind of writes off as like, you know, asking about his looks, right? Mm-hmm. If he was attractive or not. And yeah, it's a weird, I don't know. It's a weird thing to say considering this movie is well known as a romantic movie. I kind of didn't need the romance in it, to be honest. Like, I almost felt like the romance was so weirdly placed, and because of moments like that, I actually could have removed that romance and it could have just been about Tom Cruise and Cuba navigating their relationship.
I would say let's talk about that, because I think that's a good thing to pivot off of. There is that funkiness with the Jerry and the Dorothy, and yeah, they end up together, but I feel what you're saying in terms of there's a lot of emphasis on, is Jerry and Rod, are they actually friends or not? To where they actually culminate to having that conversation, like how close is their relationship, and they're really just working to build that the entire time. And I think it would have helped to really emphasize how good or not good of an agent he is if they fleshed that out a bit more.
I agree. I mean, I feel that and I think I even pointed it out while we were watching it when they had received the fax with the proposed contract from the Cardinals. And I had made a mention of, it felt like his character Rod's character kind of took a turn where he went from this very bombastic, egotistical kind of guy to kind of being very understanding of Jerry's situation. Mm-hmm. I think this was even before Dorothy's speech, I think. Mm-hmm. And it felt like the relationship kind of took a turn. And that's where all of a sudden you started getting like, you know, he's at their wedding and, you know, he's asking him for all this kind of advice. And, you know, I feel that there was more there between client and agent and then friendship that had more meat to it. And I think that the two characters bounced off each other really well. And it's not a slight against Renee. I didn't really get anything out of Renee during this and her interactions with Tom Cruise or whatever. It's definitely one of my least favorite Tom Cruise pairings in a movie. Like the chemistry wasn't quite there. And I don't know if it's just the way Renee Zellweger does her character, or if that's just the way that was written, but I felt like there was more engagement with Tom Cruise and Cuba throughout the movie. And considering that's kind of like a good chunk of the movie was more about that, I felt.
Yeah, it really was.
Well, what do you think about the scene where she kind of opens up her heart to her sister and then he inadvertently hears it?
Isn't this like the night after they had sex or something like that?
Yeah.
Like, and they've been on like 2 dates and she's like, I love him. And, you know, as far as I'm aware, she's only really had 2 real interactions with him prior to that.
This is one of those things where I don't know what it says about us or people who are hopeless romantics, but I was definitely uncomfortable with how quickly she was saying, I love him.
Usually whenever a female character in a movie says that quick, it's usually because it's going to become like a stalker situation or something, right? Like a...
Right.
So,
I mean, there's clearly something there from the very nearly opening scene of it.
With him coming out of the bedroom, kind of like, oh, I guess I'm going to run with this and eat cereal with your kid because you clearly are very much in love with me.
Well, I think at that point he was just kind of like, okay, they all know I heard, so let me just play it off, and I'm the guy, you know, in the room, and I'm the guy who gets all the attention, and I'm the charismatic one because I'm the agent, so...
And that's where it was hard, because right after that, I mean, it seems so fast that they move into the marriage phase, right? And it is sort of a, I guess if I want a sports agent story, I would like a lot of heavy emphasis on the sports agent part.
His character is like, he's surface level, trying to win, trying to compete, until the end when he realizes it's not about trying to win, trying to compete, trying to get the room, trying to be the guy. It's about the relationships that you have and not
That's the
winning.
part that bugs me personally, because the inciting incident for this entire movie is that damn, what do you call it?
The memo, yeah,
Mission
the
statement.
mission statement.
Mission statement. The mission statement, which was the thing that got him fired, that inspired her, that basically drove this entire story. We only got to see like 2 lines of this mission statement, really. And it's the thing that supposedly drove everything. And my interpretation of it was supposed to be this heartfelt way of making everything more personal and caring and all this other stuff. But I don't feel like Tom Cruise would embody that until the very end.
No, I think you're
I
right,
agree.
actually. Yeah.
Was it weird that they brought in that kind of narrator, like post halfway through, to read some of the lines from the mission statement that we didn't really know too much about?
No, well, there was the older guy who's kind of like the Lee Steinberg type of guy, who's like his mentor, who kind of said all that stuff. You mean that guy?
Yes, clearly I missed a part of it then, because every time he'd come up, I'm going, what's happening right now?
It was always random.
That's his mentor, and he's based on like a famous sports agent.
Ah, okay. See, even I needed a little bit of help with this one.
But regardless, I feel like the way that it's introduced into the movie, it felt weird. I feel like we've probably seen movies where you've had not necessarily a narrator, but that kind of character that's only there to say stuff like that. I've seen that in other movies spliced in better. And I feel like this one, it would just like pop up. He'd say 5 words and then gone. And it was never like, at first I thought maybe they were supposed to be like, his phrases were supposed to be like chapter markers, right?
Yeah, I thought
like
so
what
too,
he's saying.
yeah.
That's what I thought, but it never seemed, as I was watching, I was like, okay, well, this is going to be about what he's just talking about. And I think only one time did it ever really align with what he was saying.
But in the beginning, Tom Cruise, like Jerry Maguire, was the narrator. You know, when he was talking about all the kids and they're like prodigies in sports. Well, he's talking about them, but then it shifts from him being the narrator to his mentor guy. Does that mean anything, or is that just like, okay, this is not clear what we're doing. We need to really truncate this beginning part, and we need to have a narrator for this very, very beginning.
It's probably a bit of both. I mean, I'm going to use a line that I probably say too much. this could have been a TV show, and they could have spread it out over multiple hours. Maybe fill in some of the gaps for me, just a little bit.
I mean, that's one of the pitfalls you have when a movie spans a lot of time. Essentially, bunch of the movie is a montage, and it was pretty clear because there was one scene where like basically like faded to black in the middle of the scene. It's like, oh, okay, like they're done with this one, and then they move
We're
on.
just gonna roll with it.
But they spanned, I don't know, like a year or whatever. You know, like Rod Tidwell needed a contract in the beginning, and he got it at the end. So it's like, and then he goes from the like engaged to one woman, then splits up with her, and then gets up with Dorothy, and then it spans at least a year, right? So it's hard to do that kind of thing in a 2.5 hour movie.
I will say 1996 was a heck of a year for movies. This was obviously one of the biggest ones, and people loved it. Now that we're on and looking at this again, Matt, how do you feel about this one?
I don't get it. I don't understand how this was, the one of the biggest movies of the year. I don't think it was probably like financially one of the bigger movies of the year, but it was like Titanic, like you couldn't escape it, right? And watching this movie, like I watched it once before, completely forgot all of it except for the catchphrases. And watching it again, it was almost like I was in your position, Austin. Like I'm kind of watching it for the first time. I don't get it. I don't get it as a romantic movie. It is okay as a sports movie. As much as I didn't like it either, I'd probably watch Romeo plus Juliet for a romantic movie.
Throwback.
Yeah.
Bobby, given its quotable nature, do you think that's what's helped this film carry on? How do you feel about it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I do think that even today, I still hear "Show me the money" from time to time, and for sure, like, things like "You complete me" and those kind of things definitely resonate. And I think they helped the movie, certainly at the time and even now. And I think it does have the makings of a sweet love story, even if it's a little bit awkward. But he was awkward too, so.
He definitely was that. I feel that same way. If anyone's hasn't seen it, for the pop culture nature of it alone, turn it on, watch it. Don't look for it to be the best romantic film you've ever watched. I would love it to be a super dialed in sports movie. Maybe that's what I was looking for at the end of the day. But just to know where all these things come from and all these quotes, it's definitely the way to go. So, as always, thank you for listening. And remember that success consists of simply getting up one more time than you fall.